putting through a debate on measures that would shrink the Texan electorate, and most specifically shrink the ability of Black American voters to access their pathway to political power, because that's what voting is. So the good thing is that I can see today that Jake Tapper from CNN is at least not succumbing to a false deference to the ideal of bipartisanship by skating, allowing Republicans to skate on their anti-democratic moves. So Jake Tapper is asking Representative Michael McCall about the GOP-controlled Texas state legislature, Senate, passing a sweeping voting restrictions bill in the early hours of Sunday morning. And he pointed out that the legislation appears to specifically target Black voters. So we'll look some more at that in a moment. Roger Stone, Trump's pardoned associate, who liaised with Julian Assange to help swing the election in Trump's favor in 2016, and who was found guilty of various crimes, who was going to serve a jail sentence, but who did receive a pardon from the former guy, President Trump, who at the time he was president in that unhappy period of American history was handing out pardons like candy to his various criminal associates to, I guess it's been accurately described as part of an ongoing scheme to defraud the American public and deprive them of justice and just outcomes, and to perpetuate the theft of election integrity and political integrity from the United States. So here's a little clip of Roger Stone being queried and testifying under oath, and he's acting very much like a drug addict in this clip. So I think it's worth having a look at, just to remember what Stone is like, and to just add color to that story I'm telling this morning of Stone participating in the selling of a narrative to the susceptible part of the American public that's susceptible to believing that investigations of Trump are witch hunts, because that is their wishful thinking. That is what they would like to be true. They would like to not have made a mistake in voting for a criminal traitor, soft genocide committer against the American public, but in a more intense way against people of color in the United States. So I'll roll the clip. Let's have a look.
Okay, I'm going to asking him.
I have no obligation to do that, and I'm not going to do it.
Certified.
Yes, please do.
You can ask your individual questions like you did yesterday.
Well, take an opportunity, Mr. Stone. We have time to review the affidavit.
I'm not going to read your biography.
And tell me whether anything's inaccurate.
I'm not going to read your biography and all of your asinine claims because you're an egomaniac. I'm just not going to do that.
All right.
If you have a specific question,
we'll go to the court about it.
I agree. Let's go to the court about it. I want to do that. Your reputation here is well known. Well known.
I'm asking you. You can take your time, go through it paragraph by paragraph.
Tell
me if anything's inaccurate.
I'm not going to do that.
We went through this yesterday.
We didn't go. I didn't ask it that way.
He likes to hear his biography. It makes him feel important.
Okay, certified.
Yes, please do. I'd like
Oh, it seems to be loading.
to speak to the judge myself about this.
Better do it quick.
Before you're disbarred.
Stop. Mr. Flynn,
No further questions.
And that's his own lawyer saying, stop.
This deposition is concluded for now, subject to my going back and moving the court to produce all the documents that we requested.
Subject to your still being admitted to the bar. Please note that for the record.
Okay, so that's the end of that clip. I noticed the repeated grimacing, the touching of the nose, and the insulting of a prosecutor in a court setting. Not things that tend to impress a judge. If you're interrupting a lawyer to say, you'll be disbarred, this is all going to go away. It is very Trumpian tactics. It's very manipulative marketing style tactics rather than judicial tactics, which is where you're supposed to at least have the appearance of compliance and mutual respect. Yes, so Stone calling someone an egomaniac certainly is rich. Projection is a very real human tendency, and there's multiple illustrations of that every day. Okay, now what else I have the Jake Tapper story up now. The Jake Tapper grills Texas lawmaker on state strict voter restriction bill. Okay, it looks like they've got a video to accompany that, so I can share it and we can have a little listen, just because it is so important to encourage the media when they stop hiding, or they stop cultivating a reputation of bipartisanship that actually rewards them for helping Republicans maintain a false front to the American people, helps them skirt over misconduct, malfeasance, etc., bad records of economic management, etc. Instead of being grilled on their record, the media will grill them on what they say about their own record, and very much live in the shallows of American politics by just promoting this superficial engagement. Americans need deeper analysis, and for that they need the cycle of rewarding journalists for being so bipartisan and so civil and polite that they don't challenge Republicans on what they're actually doing. Okay, so here is this video. I can bring it up and I can press play.
Human refugee standpoint and from a counterterrorism mission standpoint.
Yeah. At home, let me ask you, the Texas Senate just voted this morning to pass a sweeping new bill restricting voting rights. A draft bill would ban drive-through voting. It would stop local officials from mailing ballots to all voters. It also would make it easier for judges to overturn an election without requiring evidence that fraud changed the race's outcome. This is not your legislation, but you are a Texas Republican. What do you say to people who look at what's going on with this kind of law and say Republicans are trying to make it harder to vote because they can't win the battle of ideas ultimately? So they're just trying to, for instance, make it tougher for Black Americans to do soul to the polls voting by saying you can only do voting on Sundays after 1 p.m. I mean, that's how it looks to millions of people.
Right. And this, as I understand, passed at 6 a.m. I haven't had a chance to look at it or really comment. I know it's going to a conference committee. There are a couple of fundamentals here, though, that I think most Americans do agree with, and that is asking for an ID. When someone votes, I don't believe that's voter suppression. I think, 70% of Americans agree with that idea. And then the idea of verifying signatures, I think, is very important.
Okay, so Jake sounds like he's letting him get away with pretending he hasn't had a chance to look at it. Yeah, Republicans always just haven't had a chance to look at it. They'd never seen Trump's tweets, so they could never comment on whatever outrageous, libel, whatever destructive domestic terrorism inciting remark that Trump had made. Whoops, didn't see it, not on Twitter. So in this case, they haven't seen something that the Republican-controlled state legislature in Texas is going to pass. Passed through the Senate and is likely to pass through the House as well. Now, Jake referenced something, a measure to disallow voting on Sundays until after 1. So say when church is on, if church runs from 9 to 10, that legislation will disrupt souls to the polls. A Black African move to give people the enjoyment of a social outing and feeling strength in numbers in the context of American history, where Black voters would sometimes be picked off individually and murdered as they went to vote. So souls to the polls is a way of overcoming that collective trauma and having people cheerfully go together in a group to all vote after church. So if you say, oh, nope, just for some reason we can't explain, we think election integrity is contingent on people only being allowed to vote after 1 p.m. on Sundays. for Sunday voting. So it's a disruptive move. No wonder that man won't admit to knowing about it, but that very evidently is an attack on the voting habits of African Americans to try and reduce enthusiasm, trying to reduce voter turnout amongst African Americans, because to a large degree they are predictably Democratic voters for the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party, because they see through a lot of that, those appeals to white supremacy and those appeals to a unmerited reputation for economic prowess that the Republican Party claims to have. And the white people that fall for that are the white people that are made gullible because of their vested interest in sustaining white dominance and white supremacy. Darren wants to know what's wrong with voter ID. So I'm happy to fill you in, Darren. There's such a thing as voter rolls. People are registered to vote, and that protects election integrity, that if you turn up and try to vote, but somebody else with that same name and voting details has already turned up to vote, there will be a conflict that's then investigated and pursued, and there are jail sentences associated with voter fraud. So that's the deterrent. You don't need voter ID, and Republicans have done research on what type of voter IDs are least likely to be put in the possession of Black American voters. Now you're like, no, surely everybody's on a level playing field in terms of access to voter ID. So this is more just like an enthusiasm test. You're kind of showing your butt a little bit, because it's as much of a test of voter enthusiasm, level field voter enthusiasm as the literacy tests were for Black Americans, a policy that, again, can sound benign to people who indulge in a lot of white supremacist motivated thinking. Like, yeah, reading is good. Why wouldn't you want voters to be able to read? It was a way of deterring and excluding Black Americans, many of whom learnt to read or memorize the Constitution so that they could pass these tests that were instituted to prevent them from exercising collective political power. Similarly, voter IDs, African Americans are more likely to have certain types of identification, but less likely to have birth certificates if they're older Americans who were born, and this is history in America that is still relatively recent, born during a time when hospitals were segregated, or just Black people weren't allowed to access hospitals. So Black women gave birth at home, and therefore their children did not obtain birth certificates accessed through the system as readily. So there's a lot of obstacles to getting ID. Also, when Republicans decide to say, sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? Everybody should have a driver's license if they want to vote. Certain people don't own cars, and Black Americans often disproportionately don't own cars, particularly in certain regions of the US. So they can get a driver's license, they can go to the DMV and get some form of license through there, but it costs money. So it's a type of poll tax. And if you still support poll taxes and don't know that there's a 24th Amendment that says poll taxes are illegal, a 24th Amendment to the Constitution, then it's always a good day to find out. Yes, it is Republican policy to shrink the electorate rather than adapt their policies to become broadly more popular. So they have a multi-pronged approach of deceive the electorate, shrink that part of the electorate that is more likely to be clued into how the Republican Party actually operates, and never change their policies, because their policies are not organized around what would benefit the public or even benefit their voters. Their policies are orchestrated around a foundational principle of benefit their donors, benefit the petrochemical billionaires such as the Koch brothers, benefit the controlling theocratic billionaires such as the Mercers, benefit those people, cut taxes, subsidize private jet ownership, make sure billionaires have a get out of contribution-free card. They don't have to pay tax at the same rate that less wealthy Americans do, and that is facilitated by Republican policies such as underfunding the IRS so that they don't have the intensive resources necessary to audit, pursue, and prosecute wealthy people who avoid paying tax. Molly's here, and Molly says hi. Thanks, Molly. Kim says, nice to see an earlier broadcast. You're welcome, Kim. I'm getting the hang of this homeschooling a little bit more, but Mondays are also an easier day for me. All right, so I paused that broadcast. Let's go back to it. I'm still pleased that Jake Tapper is at least
as well.
attempting to hold a Republican accountable for what their party is doing and the direction their party is taking with regards to slow rolling a second insurrection, making it possible for Republican officials to overturn the results of public elections. It's important for that to be for them to be held accountable for that before democracy is eroded to the point where it is entirely dysfunctional, entirely non-functional, I should say, because, yep.
What the Republicans here would tell you is that they're trying to make sure that the person voting is the person on paper, so it's a legitimate vote devoid of fraud. Now, we can debate how much fraud occurred in the last election, and Democrats have claimed fraud have happened in the previous elections. But one thing that's pretty clear to me, Jake, is that a lot of the American people seem to have lost faith in our government. They've lost faith in our elections that we need to restore. And I think if we can take measures to take fraud out of this.
See, yeah, people did lose some faith in the elections after 2016. And the fraud that we point out has been legally confirmed and through the Mueller report, through various bipartisan Senate reports, that Trump's campaign managers, Rick Gates, Paul Manafort, conspired with a Kremlin operative, Konstantin Kilimnik, passed that man polling data, internal polling data from the GOP, stuff that's obtained at high cost and is of great value to the parties that obtain it. They passed him that data for him to take back to the Kremlin. So there's liaison between the efforts to elect Trump from the American team and the Russian team that were also working to elect Trump, to then have an American president be beholden to a Russian president because they're part of his election campaign and their efforts contributed to his success. So that's the fraud in the American election of 2016, that there was illicit collaboration, illegal campaign finance law violating collaboration between Russians, Russian government operatives, and candidate Trump's campaign team at the time. Yes. So this interview that I'm playing, and I hadn't heard it before I played it, is frustrating to me because I'm like, yay, Jake Tapper's questioning him. And instead, the part that's genuinely contentious, the Republican has said, oh no, I didn't see that bit, but I'd just like to say the public has doubts about the election legitimacy, i.e. validating Trump's big lie that there was some problem with the election, even though the people involved in safeguarding that election said, we are adamant that it was a safe and secure election. It wasn't that safe. I mean, Trump was allowed to appoint a postmaster general who actively sabotaged mail-in voting by destroying destroying multiple mail sorting machines in order to slow the rate of delivery of mailed-in votes, so that Trump could then claim to have won the election and that there would be no need to keep counting. Remember those little protests of stop counting, stop counting the votes, because they wanted to say Trump has won with the red shift as it's transpired so far. Don't count those mail-in votes from Biden voters who are more likely to respect the science of the pandemic and be trying to stay away from large groups of other people. Mark is noting that he's a historian who won't put up with incorrect information. Yes. Molly's here and Marsha's here. So I'd like to say hi, Marsha. I think I've said hello to Molly. Yes. All right. Should we watch any more of this video? How much left is there? Oh, there's more. It's so painful.
System or any potential for fraud. Now, COVID was a very different circumstance where you had different voting measures and longer periods of time. And I'm all for longer early voting times, but I'm also for counting the votes during early voting. So you're not waiting a month or two after the election to see who actually won it.
But Congressman, I mean, Texas had a very successful, very clean election, and Republicans did really, really well. You won a bunch of congressional districts that Democrats thought they were going to win. The Houston Chronicle reports there are only 43 pending voter fraud charges in Texas. Just to repeat that for our viewers, not 43,000, not 4,300, 43. And only one is from the 2020 election. This, again, I don't disagree with what you're saying about polls and the American people supporting making sure that there isn't fraud, but this goes beyond that. This is, I mean, why would the legislators, not you, why would those legislators make it easier for a judge to throw out election without anyone having to prove that there's fraud?
Yeah, and of course, the 70 cases in the presidential got thrown out as well. But I think the intent, and I'm not in the state legislature, is to restore confidence.
Okay, restore confidence, i.e. Promote the fabricated narrative from Trump. So Jake tried to assert some facts there. One incidence of voter fraud linked to the 2020 election, one, and 43 over some broader period of time. But yet that man still gets to say, restore public confidence. The way to restore public confidence is to stop allowing Republicans to lie to their voting base in order to maintain their voters' loyalty, even in the face of public health jeopardizing massive lies and deceits and withholding of information from the Republican president, Donald Trump, who lied to people about COVID and still has many enablers who continue to underplay a serious virus, meaning that less Republican voters are willing to get vaccinated, meaning that Republican voters and loyal Trump Republican voters are jeopardizing the public's ability to reach vaccination-led herd immunity, which is should be the privilege of America's extraordinary wealth and resources, but is being undermined by the radical irresponsibility of Republicans. Now, it's my determination that I'm going to try and use the phrase radically irresponsible Republicans at least once per broadcast. So if you're a regular watcher and you think I've forgotten, feel free to remind me of radically irresponsible Republicans. You've got to have a catchphrase. You've got to have some message consistency, because Republicans are masters of marketing a false message. Democrats at least have to become masters of marketing true messages rather than just focusing their efforts on improving policies, because those policies won't get put into play if Republicans keep hold of power and continue their push to overthrow American democracy. I know Biden has been able to appoint 2 people to the post office board. Do you think the third person has been appointed yet? So Christopher says, get 'em, Gav, thank you. And someone called Cheese Stick has this comment for me. Who are you talking to? I'm talking to my regular audience, Pumpkin. I broadcast to a few different social media channels. So if you're on Twitch, for example, and say, well, look, I'm the only viewer via Twitch, I'm not big on Twitch. Twitch is not my target audience, but I still broadcast there because why not? Somebody might watch who's not a right-wing troll, and then there's room to benefit. All right, so let's see. I hope that DeJoy will soon be off the board, because he's a Trump leftover who's still damaging people's ability to get their medicines on time, their checks on time, the ability of small businesses to trade, to distribute their wares effectively, and to build up business and to enjoy the kind of business stability that should be a feature of a highly industrialized, highly wealthy nations such as the US, but radically irresponsible Republicans and their corrupt cronies such as DeJoy continue to sabotage because they know that decreasing the value, decreasing the quality of people's life circumstances can sometimes impair their ability to think clearly, particularly if they have been exposed to highly indoctrinating material, and then they can have a predilection for voting conservatives because they feel that things are bad and being taken from them. Impoverished life circumstances or complications of life circumstance, particularly financial circumstances, can induce some people to experience intensifying conservative leanings or intensifying subscriptions to bad ideas about how life must be a zero-sum game. And rather than acknowledging the contribution of migrants to American prosperity, entrepreneurship, ingenuity, etc., they just instead believe that migrants are taking from the truly deserving Americans. So that's part of the general push towards ethnic cleansing, which is a nasty political direction that's reared its ugly head at various intervals across American history. It predated Nazism. Adolf Hitler borrowed a lot from American pseudo-race scientists, and people continue to try and advocate for some form of ethnic cleansing in the US by arguing that there's a hierarchy of racial merit and that some people just are inherently less deserving and so should be inherently deprived of social security benefits or inherently deprived of access to government help. I do like blocking people who waste my time and who enjoy a measure of success in distracting me, because that's not conducive to good broadcasting. Sometimes I can have a little bit of fun with people who hold opinions that are antithetical to fact. I'm not saying I'm the sole possessor of access to reason and logic, but there are certain types of illogic and nihilistic types of thinking that are very predominant nowadays, particularly amongst men who can't cope with advancing civil rights because social change threatens them emotionally and they fear a loss of status and privilege. Some of those fears may be rational, but it's not rational to aspire to destroy society as a consequence. And the kind of people who applaud the military coup in Myanmar and wish fervently for the same thing to happen in the US, those people are very clearly the enemies of democracy, the enemies of social harmony and social cohesion. They're the enemies of functional everything, functional economics, functional society, functional individuals, and as such should be clearly denounced and opposed where possible. So yes. We do have some video today, which is quite critical of not just former 3-star military general, but former Chief National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, appointed by Donald Trump, espousing the idea of an insurrection in the US, a military coup. He's saying if it could happen in Myanmar, it could and should happen in the US. So we can play that on screen, because I know I've saved one in my bookmarks. And there was a lot of video of that because circulating the internet because here we go. All right, let's see if I've put it up on screen. Here is a video of former General and National Security Advisor Michael Flynn calling for a Myanmar-like coup to replace the sitting US president with Donald Trump. The talk of war is very real.
Charlie, you want to come up and the microphone up in the front? Right over here, this gentleman right here. Simple Marine, I want to know why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here. reason. I mean, it should happen. No reason. One more. Sorry, one more call. My microphone up in the front. Right over here, this gentleman right here. Simple Marine. I want to know why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here. No reason. I mean, it should happen. No reason. One more.
Okay, so that's kind of a big deal, isn't it? I've been concerned that those people were fulminating away quietly in the background, but it's not particularly quiet this weekend. That's in Dallas, Texas. That's today. And he's saying there's no reason that what happened in Myanmar can't happen here. And the audience appears to loudly cheer and applaud. I hope this gets a lot of media attention. I hope people realize that it is time to pick sides, and that if you want what happened in Myanmar to happen in the US, you should look closer at what happened in Myanmar, because the military have murdered quite a lot of people, just shot them in the streets. Of course, we know that QAnon is a murder cult. They're people who have founded a community based on the idea of celebrating executions. They've got the half nugget of truth buried in there, which is that sex trafficking is a problem, an under-discussed, under-reported on problem, that there are children who are exploited, that this is a global problem, that slavery has not ended. There are various financial, sexual, and labor slaves around the world, and that a significant number of those slaves are children, and as well as women and men and boys. So yes, Marsha says it's amazing people would cheer for that. I think the two-pronged lesson for us from 2016 should have been and should be still that there are more racists in America than you would believe. When you're feeling comfortable as if modern society has made progress away from racist ideology. And two, that the American political system is weighted to favor those racist, illogically racist people, even when they are a minority, a relative minority of voters. That there's various inbuilt structural problems with US politics, the electoral college system and Senate malapportionment that give extra power, that are like affirmative action for voters from relatively low population states with high levels of agricultural activity and high levels of residual loyalty to the profit generation patterns of slavery that occurred not just in the South, in the North as well. So there's people dispersed across America, but to a degree concentrated in various rural dominant states where there are the descendants of people who made massive fortunes from slavery, from the forced labor of enslaved people who it was calculated by an economist, and I have a video of that if you take the number of people who are enslaved in the US and the hours of labor they would have expended in terms of just counting a certain number of hours in the day and the amount of time that slavery was allowed to flourish in the United States, and then you give it, say, a conservative 3% interest, then a fair calculation for reparations would be something like $21.3 trillion. Now that can be a scary idea to some people, but it's worth just beginning to roll that idea around in our heads and in our hearts. The idea of there being some formal reparation move, as long as it's discussed well, as long as it's shown to be a form of debt repayment rather than a handout. So good to at least start discussing it, good for people to have room to get comfortable with the idea. It's not going to be imposed on anybody in any abrupt way. We can make that feeling of abruptness lessen by beginning to discuss it, and discuss it with confidence as being a debt repayment system, not something that would bankrupt the United States, but as a form of investment in the people of the United States, specifically those people whose ancestors were deprived of life, liberty, happiness, and the opportunity to pursue their own success because they were compelled to work without recompense and generate prosperity for the people who found ways to religiously, morally, and legally justify their actions in owning other human beings. All right. So the thing about that footage is I think there's actually better footage, and I'm going to try and find it. So bear with me. It'll just take a second. I'm going to visit a website called The Recount, and they sometimes are fast at putting up important news clips. Considering that news clips are more easily digestible for busy people, yes. I can't see it right now, but what I am going to do is share footage of Caitlyn Jenner talking about trans athletes and how she thinks it's a non-issue. She is a trans woman. She's a former athlete, and she's pretending that there aren't a lot of children being harmed by the Republican state push to make the lives of trans children a battleground in a culture war that they feel endears them to voters. And they're probably right. It probably does appeal to people who've been trained to rail against common sense and to rail against political correctness and social change and allowing children to be trans if that's what they feel that they are.
What I would do as governor, I would put together a commission. Trans women can compete in the Olympics, they compete in the NCAA, but when it gets down to the high school level, there's no guide rules, there's no rules and regulations how they can.
Yeah.
And trans women who are truly trans, who at a very young age, started proper medical treatment, they've grown up as girls, of course they should be able to compete in girls' sports. But yeah, some guy who hasn't done any therapy, hasn't done anything, there has to be a review board. I would be the first governor to put together a review board to review each case. Such a small issue. It's like a non-issue that's out there. And I would be surprised if there's 30 trans athletes in the entire state.
But to Dana's point.
In the entire state of California, she's surprised if there would be 30. There's probably more than 30 because there's a fair few people now who feel comfortable asking to be allowed to pursue a gender that is more aligned with what they feel comfortable with. And look, this is not a new invention across various tribes, across various human societies. There's been respect for people who are seen as two-natured or two-spirit people. And there's been respect and there's been allowances made that not everybody has to conform to a discrete gender binary. It's not scientific to pretend that gender is strictly binary. There's all sorts of chromosomal permutations that give the lie to that argument. I don't have to call you a bigot. I just have to say science doesn't support you in the way that you think it does. And you're not showing a sophisticated biological understanding as well as not showing a compassionate understanding to all of the many trans teens who are now quite powerful advocates for their people, their demographic of trans teens who are being negatively targeted by multiple Republican politicians, multiple Republican-controlled state legislatures who have made rulings that trans children cannot participate in school sports, that trans children cannot use a bathroom that conforms with their appearance, etc. And I'm just going to take a little moment to highlight the self-indulgence of this man who's making little comments here, but who has sought to characterize me as someone who's just so intolerant, as if to maintain a sustained broadcast, I should perpetually engage with people who turn up with very contrary positions to me, but also positions that are very contrary to reality. So yes, you can claim that Caitlyn Jenner is divorced from reality because she's chosen to pursue a second wind as a woman, as a trans woman. But I'm enough of a believer in individual freedom to say she can do that. And human biology tells me that people sometimes want to do that and have a strong emotional and physiological need to do that because it feels too constraining for them to conform to a gender that they were described at birth. And they have a second wind, a metamorphosis, and want to present themselves as women, and maybe they have their whole lives. And conversely with trans men. Molly says, as a member of the LGBT plus community, I can tell you she has done a lot of hurt for the transgender community. They hate her. Unsurprising, she does seem to be very self-serving and something that's not altogether unassociated with Republicans, people who often don't acknowledge problems until they are personally affected, because Republican ideology at present is contaminated with a fairly toxic strain of self-servingness that is illustrated in their reluctance to embrace medical science or their enthusiasm for unproven iterations of medical science, such as hydroxychloroquine, which is a validated medical treatment for diseases like lupus, but was associated with an exacerbation of heart arrhythmias if used to treat COVID-19. But people who dislike how long science can take to come to conclusions and who wanted to reward Trump for his impulsive desire to seem like a scientific genius and to establish a contrarian narrative about COVID that meant he was setting himself up in opposition to science and to doctors by trying to be the one person who said, look, everybody, hydroxychloroquine is clearly the answer to COVID spread. So people who support Trump and people who want to keep pretending that the Republican Party is rational have to sustain a lot of concurrently contradictory views. So they have to say COVID's a hoax, but also COVID's a plot from China. COVID is nothing and is being overhyped by the media. And yet those Democrats are trying to hide it from us and trying to stop us from calling it the China virus when we need to denounce China for this war that they've unleashed on us. So multiple contrary positions. The disease doesn't exist and you shouldn't accept what doctors and scientists say, except for this medicine, hydroxychloroquine. Some doctors like that. Let's foreground those doctors and say, don't look too hard at their background or their credibility or their pattern of saying contrarian things for money. Brian's here and says, hey, Dav. Hello, Brian. Lovely to see you. Yes, I read it on Facebook, people. It's a type of narcissism that is given a permission structure by fascism. So Trump models the type of fascist narcissism where you say, look, I'm just going with my gut. I'm not regressing to basic instincts. It's not base of me to say stuff civilization. Let's just call all the people of this one ethnic background rapists. Let's go back to that pure id of saying, I've been hurt, so let's lash out. He is encouraging Americans to unproductively lash out as part of their slow burning response to 9/11, and all of the other incidents across time and history that have been amplified, weaponized, and exploited by corrupt news organizations such as Fox News, owned by Rupert Murdoch, the converted Catholic, or the newly minted Catholic, who has used his religious convictions to oppose the increasing secularization of modern society and everything else that goes along with modern society, such as science, and acknowledging existential threats to humanity and to human civilization, such as the gradual heating of the planet, the gradually escalating heating of the planet, which is a real threat to agricultural productivity, a real threat to the viability of the insurance industry, a real threat to military infrastructure and transport infrastructure, as well as a threat to human habitation, because increasingly severe and frequent weather events do cause people's lives to be lost and their homes to be destroyed. And again, all of those negative outcomes benefit Republicans who prefer people to think irrationally and regress to that more tribalistic us, them approach of viewing the world. It's an approach that can yield benefits in certain situations. If you have to get into a fist fight with someone, it's great for you not to feel compassion for them, because you need your fist, you need your energy to be able to propel your fist forward to strike their face so that you don't go down in that fight. So certain situations benefit from the id getting let out to play. But fascism relies on emotionally manipulating a significant subset of the population to say, we're all in it together, it's us versus them, it's us, genuine, entitled white Christian Americans versus those other people. And it leads people down a road of ethnic cleansing. They don't even have to win majority support, using the inherent affirmative action, white dominance affirmative action of the Constitution and various constitutionally mandated systems such as the Electoral College and Senate malapportionment, whereby some votes count more than others. Votes of people in small population states help to elect senators who then occupy a disproportionately powerful place in the Senate relative to the number of voters who've helped bring them to power. Darren, how come you're wearing a mask? Is it that you support science, and is there room for you to be politically wedged between the Democrats, who have at least been on board with the evolving understanding of the pandemic as it has unfolded around the world, and his insights about it have unfolded in various scientific research projects? Is there a possibility that you would ever acknowledge that hundreds of thousands of Americans died as a result of the Republican president's failure to mount an effective federal level response to the pandemic? Would you ever acknowledge, for example, that the head of the federal government, former Republican President Donald Trump, knew that COVID was airborne in January and February of 2020 and chose to withhold that information from the public? That all of the scientists in that the various billion-dollar intelligence agencies of the American government had that critical knowledge, but that it wasn't passed on to American state governors or to the American people so that they could make appropriate decisions. And instead, he muddied the waters. He diffused public willingness to comply with public health directives. He endangered people's lives, and people's lives were lost, and people suffered and suffer still from disability, from heart damage, because COVID is essentially a cardiovascular disease that affects the respiratory system, but also other organs and other organ systems that involve fine vascular activity, such as liver, kidneys, etc. It is actually a double mask. So Darren's wearing a double mask in compliance with mask mandates. And I guess you're wearing that double mask to show your support for a mask mandate, or you're doing it because you're ashamed to associate your face with some of your positions. Let us know at your leisure. Brian wishes that school and mass shootings would be weaponized against the NRA and the GOP. Well, there is some action being taken against the NRA. A judge has said the NRA cannot avoid the civil cases that Attorney General, what is it? No, the District Attorney is Cy Vance of Manhattan, and the New York Attorney General is Tish James, and she is bringing legislation against the NRA to highlight their white-collar crimes, the high extent of defrauding people who pay money to the NRA. All right. And Darren did ask about my opinion on trans athletes. Yes, I do think trans athletes should be able to compete in sports. Sports is healthy. Sports is often a critical part of people developing positive relationships with their bodies. So when people do compulsory sport in school, sometimes they're shamed for not being able to climb ropes or certain things. But people who voluntarily participate in sports get to learn the dynamics of teams. They get to learn at a cellular as well as an emotional level what it means to subsume your personal interests into the collective interest of a team. The way you pass a ball and don't just always take the ball for yourself. The way you cooperate and have to listen to each other and pay attention to cues in order to achieve a positive outcome. Those skills are really critical to happy societal functioning. It helps build motivated, healthy citizens. So trans athletes competing against their non-birth gender in sports. I believe that any boy willing to say, my life is committed now to becoming a girl, if they're willing to make that public commitment, then yes, they should be allowed to compete in sports, and I'll rely on regulatory bodies to make appropriate and compassionate judgments, such as the period of time that you should be on testosterone suppressing hormones first, the amount of time that you should have been evident that you are transitioning or taking puberty hormone blockers. Might be a brief period of time, might be a long period of time. I'll leave that to the relevant authorities, but I won't leave it to Republican politicians who aren't seeking a good outcome for the children or a fair outcome for child athletes or teenage athletes. They are instead seeking a good political outcome for them and their ability to rabble-rouse a Republican base, their ability to fearmonger about trans athletes, and their ability to fearmonger about social instability caused by people stepping out of their binary gender box. I don't think it's worthy of people to spend time mocking gender fluidity or gender diversity. I don't think it's appropriate to fearmonger that society won't have any backbone to it if men aren't compelled to be men and women aren't compelled to be women, or if women aren't compelled to have children by the state if they have inadvertently procreated and a conception has occurred in a woman's body. I don't feel that that means that women should be subordinate to... Yes, should I order some waffles instead? Because I didn't make any pancakes. I didn't have any butter left. And I didn't go out for butter because it was raining quite hard.
Okay.
So you want mommy to go out for butter now? I guess so. If you do one task, I'll say good.
I'll do it now.
Did you write me a letter? No, you didn't. You just wrote a beautiful letter to yourself. Dear people.
No, I mean like people who made the book of Out of Time because I hated that.
Oh, you didn't hate that book. Make Out of Time books. I read all Out of Time books in a day. They are all amazing. but I think you should make a 4th, 5th, and 6th book. Oh, so you really like those books. I'm just going to write down the word make for you here so you can see how to spell make, though, okay?
No, I don't need. Can I have
Do you
a
see? It doesn't have a
paper?
C in it, baby. It's got
Can I have-
M-A-K-E. Can you copy that?
Is
Okay.
that how you write task?
Is that got a K in it? Yes. No C. Just T-A-S-K. S-K. That's how you write task.
I did task.
No, you didn't do the
Did
task
what?
if you read the word task. Oh, she's so funny. She's hilarious. All right. What else have we got? We watched Caitlyn Jenner. I've got 6 more minutes before it's the end of the Democracy Variety Hour. I'll go back to my bookmarks. We've seen Roger Stone grimace and bare his teeth. I'm going to touch on Nikki Haley being rude about Kamala Harris because it makes me sad, and I'm going to turn that into a happy feeling. Watch this. Okay. Here's Nikki Haley saying that Kamala Harris is vice president. Kamala Harris is unprofessional and unfit because she or her social media staff posted a picture of her saying, "Enjoy the long weekend." It is Memorial Weekend, and Monday is Memorial Day, a day for commemorating the service of American service members. And she's calling. I can't just get pancakes down. I have to get butter. You can write down the shopping list for me if you like. Get butter. But anyway, so this is the thing that cheers me up. It's a picture of Kamala Harris bending forward to listen, and it says, "What? Can't hear you from Air Force 2. So that's nice. Nikki Haley is not in the White House. She's no doubt trying to undermine public support for the Democrats, the Democratic president, the Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, in order to build a political climate in which she herself can ascend to the heights of the Oval Office. It's selfish. It's destructive. There was nothing wrong with wishing people a long weekend. Lots of people do it. We know that there are subsequent tributes to the service of American service members, the men and women who've diverted part of their lives to, or who've devoted their lives to serving their country and have put their lives on hold and potentially in harm's way in order to advance the national interest. So yes, Yahoo sucks to you, Nikki Haley. You're not in office, and with any luck, people will recognize, or at least a majority of decent Americans will recognize the mean-spiritedness and the exploitativeness of that, of trying to run with some more bad faith, manufactured outrage from the Nazi side of politics. I don't want to bandy the word Nazi around, but I have spent some years arguing that there are important and profound historical parallels between the rise of Nazism in Germany and Donald Trump's habit of deceiving the American public whilst emotionally manipulating a subsection of that public in order to increase buy-in to an agenda of ethnic cleansing, of trying to rid America of Mexican migrants, trying to rid America of people on temporary protected visas, and trying to undermine the status of migrants in the US, more generally speaking. He is happy to throw Asian Americans under the bus by promoting a negative association between Chinese Americans and a destructive, economy-destroying, public health damaging virus. And yes, not to support the actions of the Chinese government in initially concealing the virus, because that government has progressed further along the path to totalitarianism. They've spent decades being a totalitarian society, whereas Donald Trump had significantly ramped up that totalitarian pathway for the US in only a few years. So it wasn't as established and it wasn't as advanced. But it's accurate to describe his emotional style, which is also his political style, as Nazi-like in its efforts to harness the most primal destructive forms of human nature, that urge to characterize some people as other so you can achieve moral clarity in attacking them. Yes, Trump employed lots of illegal migrants, exploited lots of undocumented migrants. I don't want to call them illegal even because it's merely a misdemeanor to access the United States without appropriate documentation or visas. It becomes a felony if you cross in a second time having been deported once. But also migrants of that nature pay tax through an individual tax number without having a social security number to derive benefits from in that way. So they're people who often put much more into the American tax system than they get out. And they are people who are often exploited as a political football. Okay, baby, it's been 1 hour now of my broadcast, so that means the pro-democracy variety hour can come to an end. Yes, Trump employed undocumented migrants, just as many racist people, in fact, marry someone from a diverse ethnic background. Doesn't mean they have an adequate level of respect for people of multiracial backgrounds or people of color. They're happy to get married and exist alongside of a person of color as long as that person's in a subordinate role. So marriage is not always a guarantee of respect. And I just wanted to make that point as well. So thank you so much to everybody who listened today. I'm going to go off and buy some butter to make my daughter pancakes. Have a great day. Don't forget to learn more about what's happening in Texas with regards to the state legislature passing laws that will make it more difficult for African Americans to vote, Black Americans to access the vote, and is a product of research into Black voting patterns and the Souls to the Polls movement. Learn what that is. It's people going from church directly to the polls. You drew something for me? You drew a picture of Mummy with big teeth.
Oh, let me explain. Okay, so you have that, and
Why don't
you're
you go
going to explode.
I'm gonna explode. Why don't you go show that picture to Daddy?
Oh, and
Daddy will get a big kick
you
out
live
of
in
it.
a dumpster, you eat poo, you drink poo.
That's no way to
and
get somebody motivated to go out to the shop to buy butter for you.
you.
Maybe I'm going to buy no butter for you.
You're whipped your teeth because you're so fat, and you have a lot of bruises that so your baby auntie.
Come here and check out
And
this cheeky
here you
baby.
fall over on your tummy because it's so huge, and you got this big bruise. Which is how you became exploding, and you did so many arms, and you done so, and I love
Thanks,
it.
Christopher. Thanks, Martha.
Oh, and you're dumb.
I don't feel very motivated to get butter anymore. The motivation's just drained right out of me. Oh my gosh, that was so cheeky. It made me cry. That picture is so sad. So sad. Now I just can't go anymore. Can I say hi? You could just wave your little hand if you like. I think they could hear you.
Wait, no. Oh, and you're screaming. I forgot it. Oh, you're a lot of it.
You go show that picture to Daddy and you tell him what you did, and I'm going to send him a text message.
No.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm going to tell Daddy what you just did. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody here.
No. Do it.
They say, hi, little lady. Look, that's Christopher. I don't know that he should call you a little lady after what you just did. I'm telling Daddy.
No, don't.
Bye,
Please, I'll do anything.
Bye, everybody.
Anything.